Good evening. We are just waiting for some more people to join in. Hi, Mona. I shall await your signal to start. That's it.
It's not there.
Good evening. Good evening, Shruti. Hello, Santosh ji. Hi, Agnivesh. Hi, Shomita. Abhijit. Hi. Hi, Nidhi. Hi, Anirban. Thank you all for joining in. I'm just waiting for the admin to give me a startup. Then I'll start. Mona, awaiting your signal. Hi, Santosh ji. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wonderful to have you in the session. I'm a little bit awed by your presence. Hi, Aniket. Mona, I'm waiting for your signal. Okay, I think we should be starting now. We are past 7. Today, in the book reading session, we are talking about this book, The Goddess in Flesh. This was my first book, and this was published in 2014. So my journey started in 2014 with this book, The Goddess in Flesh. And today I'm going to discuss this book in the reading session. Thank you, Mona. Thank you. So, namaskar and good evening again. We are talking about the book, The Goddess in Flesh, which is my first book. It is basically a collection of 3 novellas. It has 3 novellas, and the first one is called Vama. Vama is also one of the names for Goddess Kali because she is left-handed. This is a story of 2 sisters tangled in a very unfortunate twist of life and death. Then the second story is Possessed. The story of a female tantric adept. This is an observation about how women are exploited in the name of religion and spiritual practices. And the third story is about the Forbidden Threshold, which actually is a story of a fallen woman, basically a mistress of a wealthy man who later on has to get into the flesh market, and then a little boy who sees the goddess in her. So these are the 3 stories. Mona, you are a left-handed person, so we can call you Vama now. Okay, so these are the 3 stories that are comprised in this book, The Goddess in Flesh. These 3 novellas are basically based in the context of rural and suburban Bengal. So the people who are acquainted with Bengal will find it all the more interesting. Though I have tried to make it very timeless and interesting to everyone. These three novellas actually explore the forbidden practices of Tantra and also many Sanatan Hindu Dharma rituals, and raise questions of how the society and religion treat the underprivileged and the unfortunate. So this is basically a gist about the book. Now, I would talk a little bit about writing. That we must keep in mind that there are two things about writing. One is the science of writing, and then there is the art of writing. The science of writing is all about the grammar, the best practices in the language, and basically it is about the technicalities of writing. Whereas when we talk about the art of writing, it is about telling a story in a very compelling manner. So this is an area of individual talent and creativity. While we can learn everything about the science of writing, the art of writing is something that can be God gifted, or it has to be developed. I don't think the art of writing can really be learnt. The science of writing can. So now I will go into the structure that I have already spoken about. I have actually broken the book reading into 4 parts. So the first part is, what do we read in a book reading session? Because there is no reason to assume that everybody is acquainted with our style of writing or even our book. Then how do we make a book interesting, a book reading interesting? So I will tell you that a book is a long narrative, and even if it is a collection of short stories, it is still a long narrative for a live session. So how do we make it interesting? Basically, I think that if we read sections which are standalone, which can stand alone as an interesting piece, I think that is a piece that can make a book reading interesting. So now I will go into the reading and give you an example. This is the description of the harem of a zamindar. The chapter name is Boshanto Kuti. If you have the book with you, then you can look at the pages 47 and 48. The Kinnaras lived in the forbidden Boshanto Kuti with the village horse. Boshanto Kuti stood in the remote fringes of the village. After generations of neglect, it was a sorry shadow of its past grandeur. It nevertheless had a fascinating history behind the dilapidation. The great-grandfather of Brojoraj, Zamindar Brojobhushan, possessed a voracious appetite for the feminine flesh. Brojobhushan had commissioned a renowned British architect to build a luxurious retreat to quell his carnal cravings. He fondly named it Boshanto Kuti. Boshanto Kuti is mainly a Bengali term which actually means a mansion which always is under the spring season. The licentious zamindar always ensured that his merry haven never ran out of the abundance of spring. It did not matter what season bore up upon the world outside. Spring lingered forever within the flowery pink walls of Boshanto Kuti. Fine liquor flowed unabated in the lavish house, where lust chased shamelessly after the yielding beauties. Haunting tumries echoed around the mansion, rendering the heart sick for love, while the ghungroos on the nimble feet of the Nautch girls kept the wicked desires aflame. Soaked in all kinds of sinful temptations, the Kuti remained deliriously engrossed in wanton pleasures night and day. The Kinnaras had been brought in to guard Brojabhushan's elaborate harem. In its heydays, Boshanto Kuti wore the look of a pampered new bride for the zamindar and the guests to deflower at their will. So, this is the description of the harem of a zamindar. And you will find a lot of Bengali terms, and the names are also spelled out in Bengali accent, because it is in the backdrop of rural and suburban Bengal. So now I move on to the structure that I had already published. So there are many times when an author wonders when to describe something or when not to describe something, because it's really a two-edged sword. Sometimes you will see, as a reader, you are skipping a chunks of, a book that you are reading, you are skipping chunks of it, and that happens generally when there is a lot of description which you feel that is hindering the narrative. So, but there is no reason to think that descriptive is wrong or it is dispensable. It is not dispensable, because if you think about a horror situation, n number of screams and exclamations will not make any difference till the time that we actually describe the whole environment. The feeling of horror will not come till you have described the entire eerie and spooky environment. So we have to understand where to go descriptive and where not to go descriptive. So now I will again go into an example in my book where I am describing a crematorium where there is a lot of tantric activity. Thank you so much, Santosh ji. I am really inspired. I really like your appreciation. Now I am describing a crematorium in the story. If you have the book, then it is page number 118 and 19. The very vicinity of the burning heart was morbid. The ground was devoid of any vegetation, though hemmed in by the dense green forests. Life had deserted the soil of the charnel ground. The barren field and the surrounding trees were grey, with a thick layer of ash that flew all around. The dreary paleness around the crematorium made it look terribly worn and unearthly. A small temple stood at the end of the crematorium. In the dark sanctum of the temple sat two black boulders, one carrying the triple striped mark of Shiva, and the other had three fierce eyes painted upon it, representing the Mother Goddess. A trident stood beside the rock representing Shiva, and a kharga was erected next to the rock representing the Mother. Several human skulls and bones lay around the deities, among other things, which were obviously placed before them as ritual offerings. The smell of stale ghee mingled with that of frankincense hung heavy in the air. Out in the open roamed wild dogs, cats, and jackals, skulking amongst the remains of burnt out pyres. Bizarre relics of tantric worship, charred wood, bones, and broken pieces of earthen pots lay scattered around the ground, among other such things. Korotir Mart was uncannily desolate in the hours of the sun. Very few tantrics were seen at the grounds during daytime. Generally reclusive, they retreated into the forest, returning after darkness had engulfed the charnel ground. Korotir Mart came alive in the mornings only when the dead were brought for cremation. Dombey watched in silence as the mourners went about their funerary duties with somber faces and tearful eyes. They did not interest her. But the nights were different. An eerie frenzy gripped Korotir Mart as soon as the sun drowned into the western horizon. The place came alive with mysterious characters and their bizarre activities. Men of wrathful appearance and terrible bearings appeared from nowhere and seemed to invoke the spirits of the night through unearthly rituals. Blood-curdling shrieks and wails filled the air as though the disturbed souls of the dead and had descended on the grounds for a hell-raising orgy at the thick of night. Now, you see, this is quite a long descriptive piece, but I think it makes up for the total environment that I would be talking about later in the story. This is a very bizarre and strange kind of environment which has to be described in order to understand where the story is going. Now I'll go back to the structure. Now I'll talk about building up characters. Basically, like in a movie, the actors build up the story. In a book or a narrative, the characters build up the story. If they do not emerge out of the pages of the book and materialize in front of the reader, then the narrative fails to hold the reader to itself. Now, a narrative, I think, must transport the reader to its own world and its own magic. Only then a reader is interested to carry on with reading the book. I think there are three main things about character building. One is definitely the physical description of the character. Sometimes very, very experienced authors, they skip the physical description of the character because they feel that they want to give the freedom to the readers to imagine the form of the character, the face of the character, the mannerisms of the character. But generally speaking, a character has to be physically described so that what the author is wanting to transfer to the reader, the vision that the author has had about the character, will be transferred to the reader. Another very, very important thing about writing, I would say, is how an author lives his characters. Each character has to be lived by the author. And this is not something that is I'm just speaking. I have written two books, and I three novellas and one entire novel, and I have found that I have to live every character, even if it is a small character, to bring out the actual human being that I'm trying to describe. I sometimes stood in front of the mirror and spoke the dialogues that I was going to write in the book, because I felt that if the dialogue is not convincing me back, then probably it will not convince the reader. So I would enact the dialogue in front of the mirror, and then if I was convinced that okay, this mannerism and this way and these words are suiting the character, only then I would write about that character, and I would write that dialogue. Okay, so to explain this, I will go back to the reading. Here I am describing the character of a high priest of a Kali temple. If you have the book, then it is page number 19. Tall and lean, Durga Prasad had a distant and sacrosanct air about him. He remained as remote and unaffected from the rest of the world as the stone idols of the god he worshipped. His remarkably large and heavy-lidded eyes, below a pair of high, curved brows, never lowered their gaze. His sight always seemed to be directed heavenwards, as though he belonged up there. An enormous circle of vermilion stood upon his broad forehead in striking contrast with his extraordinarily fair and smooth complexion. At the back of his balding head, scraping his shoulders, hung the Brahminical tuft of silken grey hair. He wore a crimson dhoti and wrapped a crimson shawl around his shoulders. The rest of his upper body was left bare, revealing a clump of silver grey hair upon his chest. No one had ever seen him wearing anything else. Durga Prasad spoke sparingly. His voice was a rich baritone and his language classical, perfectly befitting a man standing at the brink of divinity. They called him Thakur, not in vain. His manner justified the awe in which the villagers held him. Reaching the altar, the crimson-clad priest prostrated in front of the goddess with a dramatic flair. Hands joined above his head, he remained prostrated upon the ground in a display of extraordinary devotion as the villagers watched in silence. Rising thereafter, he stood up to his tall, august stature and raised his hand to bless the gathering. A rapturous gasp rose from the people as they raised their hands heavenwards, chanting, "Joy Ma Kali! Joy Ma Kali!" A smug smile spread upon the holy man's face as he gestured graciously for them to be seated. Cowering in awe of his sublime presence, the crowd began to settle upon the straw mats. So I think the description of Durga Prasad has actually materialized the character in front of the eyes of the reader. Now, whatever Durga Prasad will do or he will say has to match up with how I have described him, how he has materialized in front of the reader. So that consistency has to be maintained if we have to build a convincing character. Now, the last thing that I had already published, that I will talk about dialogues. Again, actually, when I was talking about building the characters, I have already spoken about it, that when we write the dialogues, we have to make sure that the words that we are putting in the dialogues are the character's words. It cannot be my word. As an author, it cannot be my word, because every individual has a particular mannerism, has a particular attitude, and has a particular kind of vocabulary according to his social standing, his education, his situation. If he is in a rural setting, or in an urban setting, or in a very high class setting, the language will change. The words, the vocabulary will change. The tone of what is being said will change. So, I think the dialogues have to be enacted and thoroughly validated by the author himself, with the vision of the physical description that he has already given, and the social standing of the individual. Only then, if the description matches the dialogues, only then we will see that it is all coming together as a gripping narrative. Yes, Sunilji, his age too. The character's age is also an important thing in deciding what words will be put in his mouth, what attitude will be put into his character. You're very right, Sunilji. Thank you for giving that input. So now I will read. Now this is going to be a long reading. This is the last one. I am going to read a very, very interesting chapter. I'm going to read this entire chapter, where a hijra, a kinnar, is having a very aggressive encounter with the high priest that I have just spoken about. It is a very explosive situation that I am describing. Here you will see there is a lot of description as well as a lot of dialogues, heated exchanges between the high priest and the Kinnara. Thank you, Vandita. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ipsy. Now, if you have the book, please look at page 57. This is a chapter called Matangini's Curse. The Kinnara in the story is known as Matangini. The Sandhya Aarti at the Kali Badi had just finished. The crowd of devotees was slowly thinning. Suddenly, Matangini and her troop appeared at the temple ground and proceeded towards the stairs leading to the temple. Seeing the Kinnaras approach the holy precincts, Durga Prasad dashed forward to prevent them. He stood in their way, hands outstretched to the sides in order to block their way in. The frail body of Dakshini lay listless, cradled in Matangini's arms. Blood was slowly oozing out of her nose and mouth. The other Kinnaras stood behind Matangini, beating their chests, howling and clapping. An uncanny environment was built up around the temple as the commotion was escalating with an uproarious clamor. Matangini stood silent and wide-eyed in unspeakable grief. Relentless tears flowed down her cheeks. Her disheveled hair flew in the rising wind like a million serpents all around her head. The big circle of vermilion she wore on her forehead was smudged. Matangini looked pathetic and frightful at the same time. She stood staring at the priest in mute supplication. Her followers chanted, "Have mercy, O Mother, save us." Durga Prasad stood unaffected, his hands crossed upon his chest in an unmoving his hands crossed upon his chest in an unmoving, defiant manner. Laying the child at the Thakur's feet, Matangini pleaded pitifully, "Have mercy on the poor child, Thakur. She is vomiting blood since morning." Her body racked with violent sobs as she spoke. "The Kobiraj has given up hope. Please, Thakur, lay her at the mother's feet and pray for her life." Durga Prasad's face contorted in rage. He bellowed, "Get out! Leave the temple precincts this moment." "This is a bastard." He pointed the finger to the child. "You all know that she was disposed on the stairs of the temple pond by her own mother. And you expect me to let this creature of foul blood desecrate the temple?" Curious villagers began to gather around the temple to watch the heated exchanges. Matangini did not budge. She left the child laying at the priest's feet, lest his hardened heart relented at the child's plight. But the holy man did not soften. He roared instead, "Leave!" In an ugly display of censure, he lifted his feet to kick the unconscious child laying before him. Matangini swept the child out of harm's way like a great eagle and pulled up herself to her towering height. She stood face to face with Durga Prasad, breathing fire. She looked into the priest's eyes, piercing them with the embers that shot from her own. The towering figures of Durga Prasad and Matangini stood regarding each other with utmost contempt in an explosive standoff. "Don't you dare!" she hissed into his face. Clutching the child tightly into her bosom, she declared, "Upon the blood that my child spills today, O sinner, my black tongue curses you. Your blood shall be drawn, and that too at the hands of a woman, very soon." Having spoken this terrible decree, she spat sharply on Durga Prasad's face. Matangini's outrageous act left Durga Prasad and the others aghast. No one had ever imagined that the venerated priest could be humiliated in a manner so blatant. Durga Prasad was too shaken to react. Trembling with humiliation and rage, he retreated into the temple and slammed the door shut. It seemed as though doomsday was upon the village. The insult of the godly priest by a Kinnara was no less than an earth-shattering blasphemy. The gathering outside the temple trembled, dreading what was to come next. But their fears remained unfounded as the temple lights went off quietly behind the closed doors, without any sign of activity thereafter. The gathering thinned gradually as there was no further action from either side. It was an irony that despite being mere mortals, Durga Prasad and Matangini had the freedom to act according to their own sense of justice. but the goddess remained confined within the stone walls of the dark sanctum. She stood mute, captive to Durga Prasad's warped ideas of religious propriety and holiness. So this is the end of the reading. I hope you all enjoyed it. Now I will take questions. If you have any questions about the reading or the book, I would be happy to answer any question that you have. Yes, Sadhbiji, a warped idea of religious propriety and holiness, I would say, because the priests, the custodians of religion, always feel that they have the right to talk on behalf of the god and thrust their own ideas, though they are warped most of the time, on people, on other people who are less privileged. Thank you, Sunilji. Thank you so much. I would love any questions that you want to ask me. Mona, is there anything that I need to speak about? Yes, indeed, Sadhbiji. They get their sway because they are powerful, and people listen to them. That's the most important thing, that people do listen to them and do not judge for themselves what is right and what is wrong. Thank you, Malika. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sadhbiji. I'm really, really honored. Thank you, Mona. Thank you so much. Any questions anybody has about the book or about the reading that we just had? Thank you so much, Sadhbiji, again. Thank you. Welcome, Banerjee. Thank you, Shudibda. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that so many of my friends and people that I really respect have joined in and heard my reading. I hope you have enjoyed it. And I would like to introduce my son Om Banerjee here. Say hi.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, he is the technical man behind this Facebook Live. He has helped me to set up this Facebook Live so that I could do my reading well. Thank you, my son. Yes, Sadhbiji, next Saturday, I have a poetry reading session with Plethora itself. Again, Mona has invited me. I'm so delighted that she has given me 2 sessions. Thank you so much, Menaji. I missed you. Say thank you.
Thank you for all the appreciation.
Come here. Come here.
Thank you very much for all the appreciation.
Thank you, Sunilji. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has benefited and liked the reading session. I have tried to make it as interesting as possible. I'm looking forward to any questions that anyone has. Mona, I think we have exceeded the time, isn't it? we were supposed to have a half an hour session. Thank you, Sunilji. Thank you so much. You're looking like a hunk. Okay, I think there is no question right now, and I certainly hope that I have at least what I have at least done justice to the reading. In the queue. Okay, Mona tells me that there are questions in the queue. I'll just try to find the questions. Thank you, Smita. Thank you so much for the lovely adjectives that you have used for the reading. Thank you, Malika. Mona, I can't find the questions. Do you have them? Anyway, I think I will talk a little bit about the book while we are waiting for the questions. This book actually was inspired. I started writing this book inspired by a very I don't know if it can be called an inspiration, because there was many years ago when I was in college, there was a news report about a very terrible tantric ritual in some rural place in India, where a girl was murdered. She was given as an offering to the goddess, and her death was so brutal. She was not killed in one go, actually. Her fingers were cut off, then her hands were cut off, then the feet were cut off. The description was so terrible. And at that time, we were not exposed to so much violence and graphic, vivid description of these things like we are now. They even show the dead bodies of people. Generally, at that time, the newspapers and TV did not cover it. They only talked about it. So the words, they pierced me so much that the first thing I wrote is about that. So the first story of this book, Vama, is basically about a human sacrifice of the twin sister of Vama. Her twin sister is called Uma, and this is about the sacrifice. Yes, thank you, Mona. Mona is asking me that how did you create these stories? Are they your real life observation or your imaginative representation of the world inside your mind? Thank you, Mona. Actually, as I said, the first story, it is a combination of both. It is a combination of both, because the first story, Vama, as I was talking about, it was inspired by this report. But when I started writing it, I had to flesh it out. I had to imagine a situation. I had to build so many characters, and I had to build a convincing plot. and that too in a place that I have never been. I have never lived in a village, but I had to describe the life of a village and staying close to a forest. So in that case, there is a lot that needs to be imagined, and there was a lot of research to be done. There is a lot to be imagined, and then to validate if this is really convincing. Otherwise my story would fall flat. So it is really a combination of a real life incident which had deeply affected me, and also my imagination, and then the validation if it was convincing or not. So I think that answers the question, Mona. Now I will talk about the third story, The Forbidden Threshold. I don't know if outside Bengal people know about this ritual, that the idol of the goddess Durga is made out of clay, and a little, I mean, the clay that is brought in to make the idol, that is mixed with a little bit of soil that comes from the whorehouses. It is brought from the Nishiddhopolli, that is the forbidden threshold, the forbidden red light areas. And why is that? I got so interested in this, in the logic that is given, that I wrote this story. This inspired me to write an entire novella on this. So basically the idea is that when a man crosses the forbidden threshold, he is leaving all his good deeds outside the threshold, and then he is going into an area which is totally sinful. That means he is entering the whorehouse. So the soil outside is a repository of all the good deeds of the men who have gone beyond that threshold. So all the good deeds of those men are accumulated there, and the threshold, the soil outside the threshold becomes very sacred. So yeah, probably Sunilji, I maybe this was covered somewhere in the movie. So this aspect was, so I was thinking that everything is about the men, their good deeds. Sinful world, who made it sinful? The space inside the threshold, beyond the threshold, who made it sinful? Is it the woman who resides inside? And it is such a blatant thing that the soil is taken from there, from the outside the threshold, and the idol of the goddess is made out of that, in full knowledge of the women in the red light areas. In recent years, I have seen reports where these women are protesting this, and I think that is one good thing, because how long are these women going to be unilaterally called bad names, called sinners, while the people who are making them sinners go scot-free? So these are the things that have inspired entire novels out of me. So this journey was very, very interesting. From the little bit of inspiration to an entire plot to building the characters and publishing the book. I think I've spoken a lot. Are there any other questions that I can take? Okay, I will. Thank you, Mona. I will take the questions over there in the group. I think we have exceeded the time as well. So, should we be ending the session here? Thank you, everyone who has joined in and listened so patiently to my reading. I hope you have liked it and it has been of some benefit to you. Absolutely, Sunilji. I mean, isn't it always the case that whatever is bad in the society is somehow in even if not directly, indirectly, it is put on the shoulders of the women. Though we are called the weaker sex, but the thrust of all the mistreatment and misjudgment is all put on the women's shoulders. It is really a sad and very angering situation. And that is where feminism and women empowerment comes from. Though nowadays feminism is looked at as a very pejorative kind of term, which I mean it has been it is mocked upon actually. Thank you so much, Sunandan, and thank you so much, Aryaman. Now, I think we have really exceeded the time by a lot of, I think by half an hour. So I would thank everyone for listening to me patiently, and I hope you have benefited from the session. Thank you so much. Thank you and good night. Namaskar.